miracles right now. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. We are going to be in Luke chapter 15, surprise, surprise. Last week we're going to be there, but there we are again. And as you're flipping there, I'll tell you, I've had a lot of jobs in my life. And some of you go, hey, Jordan, you don't understand. But I've had a lot of jobs in my life. Did anybody here, by raise of hands, did anybody here has worked a job for more than 30 years at the same job, same company? Wow, that's awesome. This side of the room, struggling, all right? That side of the room, we're going to just cater to your needs because I know you'll be committed here for a long time too. Working, I've worked a lot of different jobs. My first job, I delivered Christian magazines all around to doctors' offices and churches. And I'm pretty sure I spent more in gas in my Jeep Cherokee that got about 15 miles to the gallon than I did making money. But that was my first job. I worked in a doctor's office sorting and filing charts for a summer. I worked at the local elementary school where I did the after-school program. Me and my buddies worked there, and we would just play dodgeball, which was in the day that you could still play dodgeball. We would play football and basketball, and so that's just what we did. I don't think the kids had as much fun as we did, but it was a daily competition. I have... some of you may know that I taught geometry and algebra for a year in a public school, which that was fun. Carlin says I look back on it with a much more rosy glasses than it was. But so thank you, Sean, for going to a high school and teaching math every day. Some of you may not know this. I drove Uber for a semester while I was working. I had Fridays and Saturdays off, and so I would drive Uber. That's an interesting experience. You know about that, yes. So, and then I was thinking back, I've worked for 5 different churches in 7 different roles. I've had a lot of jobs. But by far the hardest job that I've ever had in my whole life started about 6 years ago. And as I look back, the first moments that I took part in that job were a crash course in, you're not going to be able to do this job well, and there's not much you can do in this job. You're just going to keep trying. So that job was fatherhood. Cooper was born May 16th, 2017, almost 6 years ago. We were in shock when they said Carlin was able to have this child naturally, and he was 8.5 pounds. I was like, the math doesn't work. And they said, trust us, we're the experts. And I said, I stayed at Holiday Inn Express last night, and they didn't think that was funny. So, just like you. So those moments, here I am, not doing anything, just watching her do everything. And he is born, he comes out, and I'm sitting there with my camera, like my phone, ready to video, and then just shock takes place. He comes out purplish. And those first moments, the things that that you should hear is that cry, right? And I'm like, all right, buddy, cry. Come on, cry. Where's the cry? Nothing. The nurses then step in immediately. They grab him, start shooting a tube down his throat. Carlin's like, what's going on? And I'm like, I don't know either. Should I take pictures or not right now, right? They're sticking a tube down his throat. They're hitting him on the back. I thought we did a nice pat. No, they were hitting him on the back, just trying to get, and finally, after probably 15, 25 seconds, but it felt like 5 minutes, he cries. And you go, he's okay. And as the purple kind of subsides, so does the panic. And you go, okay, now can I hold him? And see, that moment was just filled with panic and confusion. I think there was pain for them, not so much for me, but there was just chaos. And then I remember that same day, Cooper is brought to our room. They have those little carts, with the little bassinet that's like plastic or whatever on top. And I decided I needed to change his diaper. And so I started in on it, and he moved a lot more than the doll does. And so I am struggling. And as he is moving, the pediatrician that's on call at the hospital shows up. Never met this man in my life. He goes, you're doing it wrong. Scoot over. And so he does it. And it was just another reminder of, man, I can't fix it. I fail. I struggle. And every day since, or at least every week since, has been a reminder that this is the hardest job I have ever signed up for. I look at Carlin all the time and I say, Carlin, this is way harder than I ever thought it was going to be. And she was like, did you think it was easy? And I was like, I didn't think it was this hard. And so that has been the last 5.5, 6 years. It has stretched me. It has humbled me. It has given me joy that I could never imagine. It has brought frustration that I didn't know would ever exist. It has caused me to apologize more. It has stolen more of my sleep than anything else, but it's also brought the sweetest moments. Fatherhood is extremely hard. And today, I want us to focus in on the father of the story now we have studied for the 4th straight week. As I read the text, and this time we're going to read it in entirety, so that'll be fun. As we read the text, I want you to key in on the actions and the activity of the father. So starting in Luke chapter 15, verse 11, it says this. Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the property that is coming to me. And so the father divided his property between his sons. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had. He took a journey to a far country. There he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in the land. If you want to know more about that, go back 3 weeks. He began to be in need. So he went, he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country who sent him into the field to feed pigs. Disgusting in our day, extremely just beyond imaginable uncleanliness for the Jews hearing this. He's feeding the pigs, and while he was there longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. Dire circumstance. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? He says, I will arise and go to my father, because I know my father. I have faith in the character of my father. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, and before you I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. Go back 2 weeks ago and hear how he was treated. We'll take a snippet here. He goes back, treat me as one of your hired servants. So he arose and he came to his father, but while he was still a long way off, watch the father. His father saw him, felt compassion. He ran, he embraced him, and he kissed him. And the son began his apology. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father, interrupting his son, said to the servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate. Why? For this son was dead and he is alive. He was lost and he is found. And they began to celebrate. We see the picture of the father, right? But then we go back to the older son. Remember, this man had 2 sons. So the older son was in the field, and as he came and he drew near to the house, and he heard the music and the dancing, and one of the servants, and he asked one of the servants, what does this mean? And the servant said, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he's received him back safe and sound. But he was angry. He refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. The son is angry, stays outside. The father comes out and entreats and begs and pleads with him. But he answered, look, these many years I have served you. I've been a slave to you. I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me even a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, when he comes back, you killed the fattened calf for him. He said to him, son, my child, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. So to recap what we've talked about over the last 3 weeks, these ungrateful sons have constantly and continually insulted, dishonored, rejected, and hated their father. They wished the father was dead. All that he was an inheritance that they couldn't wait to receive. Their only concern was what they wanted and how they were going to get it. They took two different paths, but they had the same heart and attitude. There was no concern for their father, no honoring of him to be found. He was openly despised by his sons. He would have been slandered by the townspeople. He was the walking picture of a failure because his kids were a reflection of who he is. One of his sons leaves, the other embarrasses him at the feast. One openly hates him, the other probably secretly hated him. Fatherhood is hard. And see, the father in Jesus' story would have had the rights to punish his sons. He could have stoned that younger son with his request. He could have stoned him right there. He also could have, when the younger son left with his inheritance, he could have had a funeral and say, this son, though he is alive, he is dead to me, and I will have no interaction with him ever again. While he could have done all of those things, he chooses not to. Instead of avenging himself, instead of enacting justice in that moment, he is a picture of constant mercy. The father in our story displays a character that is completely shocking, even for us. He's generous to a son who wishes he was dead, at a great expense to him. He is kind and gentle to a son who refuses to celebrate with him. He gives freedom to his kids to make their own choice while still showing his love to them at all times. See, the father longs for both sons to come home. For one son, he is looking on the horizon every day, waiting and watching. For the other son, he is stepping outside of the greatest party he has ever thrown in his life, the happiest moment of his life. He hasn't forgotten the other son, because we don't rob the sons don't rob each other's love from the father. No, it's not diminished because he loves the other. No, the father leaves where he is to meet both sons in their sin. He goes to them. The father deeply desires both to be with him, both to be loved by him, both to know him and to trust him and to embrace him, and yet he doesn't force it on either one of them. See, in Jesus' telling of this story, this picture of the Father that he is giving us a glimpse of is God our Father. The one who longs for us and who loves us. The one who leaves the confines of heaven to come to us, to meet us where we are, to bring us home. The God that calls us home, who desires that we trust him, to know him and to love him. See, actually, in Luke 15, Jesus tells three parables. We talked about this last week. He talks about a lost sheep, and God, as the shepherd, goes and finds that lost sheep, leaving the 99 for the one. He talks about a lost coin and a woman who loses a coin in the house, and so she lights a lamp, and then she sweeps out every nook and cranny, doing everything that she can to find that lost coin. And then he tells this story of a lost son, and a father who races down the road and who leaves the party to meet his children and invite them in. But what's interesting is joy is the center of all of these stories. Look back in Luke chapter 15 at verse 5. It'll be on the screen as well. When the shepherd finds the lost sheep, what does he say? And when he had found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, and he says to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost." Have you ever had a kid kind of go astray? Or did you ever go astray as a kid and your parents can't find you, or you can't find them? Maybe you're in the mall somewhere and they start kind of calling your name. Usually that moment when you get reunited is not a joy-filled moment. That moment usually involves a lot of scolding. I told you to stand here. Where were you? Why were you not looking for me? Why did you not stay with me? No, the shepherd runs off and doesn't scold that one sheep. No, he rejoices. He puts him on his shoulders. He doesn't make him walk home. You got this far, now go back. No. It says at verse 7, "Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner repents than 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. There is joy from God when the lost is found. Go on to verse 9. And when she found it, the lady finds the coin. She calls together all her friends and her neighbors, and she says, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I lost." Just so I tell you, there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. And in verse 32, it was fitting, the Father says, to celebrate and be glad. Why? Because this brother, your brother, he was dead and he is alive. He was lost and he is found. See, joy is key and pivotal here. God is pictured over and over at being joyful when the lost is found. And it is a joy that he can't keep to himself. That's the kind of joy that I kind of live with. I'm sorry, that's just who I am. If I find out something cool, you're going to hear about it. And so, I think it's awesome. Come talk to me. I want to tell you all about the America's Got Talent show I saw Thursday night. It was amazing. I will spend the next 30 minutes telling you all about it. Last night, we flew in. My in-laws had to watch a video of every single act that we saw because it's this joy that's I can't contain. I want to share it. And so what happens in these stories? The shepherd finds a sheep and he invites everybody, friends and neighbors, come and celebrate with me. The woman finds the coin. We would say, all right, just leave me alone. No, come and celebrate. This is exciting news. The Father sees his Son and he says, well, we're going to celebrate. He invites everybody that he possibly can. Come and enjoy this party with me. The joy of the Father is on full display when the lost is found. Henry Nouwen says it this way. He says, God rejoices. And this is key. Listen to what he adds. Not because all the problems of the world have been solved. Not because all human pain and suffering have come to an end. Not because thousands of people have been converted and are now praising. There wasn't the threshold to make God rejoice. The threshold in which that had to be crossed for God to rejoice is when one of his children are found. When you come to an understanding that God loves you deeply, he knows you fully and loves you beyond what you can imagine, that brings out joy in heaven and rejoicing of all the angels when sinners become sons. And so I hope you know this God. This God who loves you, not the corporate you. I'm not using some plural you here. I would say y'all, because that's where I'm from, right? When I say you, I am saying Abel. I am saying Grady. I am saying Faye. When we say God loves you, it is you, Mike, and Matt, and Connor, and Aaron. That is the you. He knows you, and he loves you. This is the same God that we've been talking about on Wednesday nights, who is omniscient, who knows everything. That he is omnipotent, that he is all-powerful and can do everything. That is omnipresent, that is everywhere at all times. And that God who resides in heaven and is over all things cares about you. And races down the road for you and leaves the party for you. Is that the God that you know? He's not some divine judge just waiting to punish you. He's not some vengeful and spiteful being just looking for you to fail. No, he is for you. He is rooting for you, and he desires you. Do you know this God? The God who steps down from heaven to experiencing the most grueling pain imaginable, as nails pierce his hands and his feet, as blood drips down his brow, as breaths become more and more painful by the moment. And yet, he does it by his choice, because of his love. Do you know that God? I sure hope so. If you don't, every Sunday, every Wednesday, and probably every day during the week, I'm going to try to point you to him. Now, we're going to shift gears completely. There's no transition. I try to do good transitions. There's none. So just, here we go. The last 8 minutes, I had 2 sermons to preach today, so you got a half one there, and here's the other half, all right? So here we go. Have you ever just read something, seen something, heard something that just completely just changes your mind? Like, just, it changes your life, it changes what you do. This is a gross one, but I'm going to use it because we just need to liven up for just a moment, all right? About 3 months ago, I saw a video. They did a study that when you flush the toilet, this is gross and don't make this the only thing you hear, but it is true. When you flush the toilet, the water droplets, some of them, then shoot up into the air. Oh gosh, Yolanda's a doctor and she's agreeing with me. Thank you. So the particles then disperse across the room to your uncovered toothbrush, to your hairbrush, to all of these nice things. And whatever was contaminating the water now is distributed across the room. So I blame TikTok for that. So now, every time you flush, you close the toilet lid. I have taught Cooper that. We flush, we close the toilet lid. That is just what we do in our house because it is a complete shift in my practice. Okay, because I heard that and it changed everything for me. I use that segue to tell you that 5 years ago I read something that changed my whole perspective on this passage. 5 years ago I was reading a book called The Return of the Prodigal Son by a man named Henry Nouwen. I've already quoted him once because it's just good. These words are still ingrained in me. I will read a snippet of what he said. He's been talking about the younger son. He's been talking about the older son, and now he is coming to the father, and he says, but there is more to this story. A child does not remain a child. A child becomes an adult. And an adult may become a father or a mother. He says, when the prodigal son returns home, he doesn't return to remain a child, but to become a father himself. And as the returned children of God, we are invited not only into the house, but there is a call on our lives, not just to come home, but to become like the Father. See, for a long time, he says, I lived with the insight that returning to the Father was my ultimate call, but there is a call beyond return. A call to become the father who celebrates and welcomes home. I've taught this passage a long time in a lot of different churches. And I've always only ever heard it and only ever taught it this way. If you're the younger son, God will welcome you warmly. Come home. He loves you. And then for the church crowd that maybe you've been a Christian for 5, 10 years, hopefully you're not the younger son anymore, though you remember your past, but now you're gravitating towards that older son, right? The self-righteous, pharisaical, I'm right, he doesn't deserve this. And so what we do is, in church world, if on a Sunday morning we may preach the younger son, on a Wednesday night with the committed church people, we are going to preach the stop being self-righteous. And those were the only 2 options. And then I read Henry Nouwen. He said, what if we don't just stop at being a child? What if we need to understand we need to grow up? And we need to become like the Father of this passage. It's quite biblical. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 1. Be imitators of God as dearly beloved children. Luke chapter 6, verse 36, Jesus says, be merciful as your Father is merciful. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 14, it says this, as obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but, what does it say? It says, but as he who called you is holy, you also are to be holy in all of your conduct. Or are we striving to be like the Father of Luke chapter 15? Or are we just trying to avoid being a son? Is our aim every day to become more and more like this Father? A year ago, If you think back a year ago, are you more like the Father now than you were a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Have you grown in maturity? Are you growing in grace and compassion and mercy and kindness and generosity and love? Now it says, those received by God should then receive as God. That we should receive others as God has received us. Those who have come home now need to learn how to create a home for others to find rest and reconciliation and redemption. He'll say, if God forgives the sinners, then those who have faith in God should do the same. If God welcomes home sinners, then us who certainly trust in God should do the same. If God is compassionate, then those of us who love God should act with that same compassion. See, in this parable, we see our God longing for the wayward, being kind and generous, seeking those who have hurt him, forgiving those who have failed him, loving those who do not love him back. We see a God who offers grace to those who do not deserve it. But what about you? Is that how you're living? Are you living like the father of this story? Or are you just trying to avoid being a child? Are you living in a way that people feel kindness and generosity come from you? Are you compassionate and merciful? Are you forgiving? Are you seeking the lost? Are you loving those who do not love you? Are you offering grace or are you hoarding it? See, if we're saved by Jesus, that by grace through faith, then our only response is to live out the love that we have received. As people freely forgiven, we should be people freely forgiving others. Sadly, I don't see that in the church as much. Too often, we contrast who God is rather than correspond with him or cooperate. That's why Gandhi said, right? I like your Christ, but not your Christians. They're not anything like your Christ. See, we fall into this place of being cynical and judgmental. We're vengeful, we're spiteful, we're hateful, we're hurtful. We get very calloused, jaded, and we try to exact our revenge. But the question is that our job? Is that our job? Romans 12, I tried to paraphrase it, but it's too good, I can't do it, so we're just going to read some of it. Starting in verse 9. Highly encourage you to go back and look at this at another point. But Romans 12, verse 9, he started this chapter off saying, your best way of worship, or how do you worship God, is by becoming a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual worship, it says. It tells us how to use our gifts. And then in verse 9 it says this, let love be genuine, abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Love one another with a brotherly affection. Outdo one another in honor. These are the ways that we can live like the Father here on earth every single day. Verse 11, don't be slothful in zeal, but be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek ways to show hospitality to others. Bless those that persecute you and bless and don't curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so as it depends on you, live peacefully with everyone, with all. Never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine. What are we called to do? As imitators of God, we are called to imitate the Father of Luke chapter 15. We are called to love deeply. We are called to pour out grace abundantly. We are called to care for people. We are called to see people. We are called to look for people. We are called to be like this Father. Be imitators of God. Becoming this Father, loving genuinely, abhorring evil, working hard, being patient, prayerful, helpful, generous, seeking unity, ways to bless. And then when we struggle, we can be reminded of this. Ephesians 5, we'll throw it one more on the screen for you. It says, therefore be imitators of God as dearly beloved children And then it says this, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. As we struggle with what to do, we are told to look to Christ, the image of the invisible God, the one who forgives his persecutors, who embraces sinners, who makes time for the hurting, who reconciles with those that denied him, who embraces failures. This is what we're called to do. So today we preach 2 separate sermons, but I hope you see them coming and converging together. See, in Luke chapter 15, Jesus is painting a picture to the sinners and tax collectors and to the Pharisees who are grumbling of the great God that wants to be the God for both parties, who loves deeply, who seeks everywhere and celebrates return. But also, I want you to realize that your calling is not just to be found. Your calling is to live out that same way as the Father. That as you've been received by God, now you receive as God. So that people may experience the gospel through you. The hardest job I've ever had, I said, is being a father. And as we take steps of trying to be like God, our Father, it's going to be really hard. You're going to fail. You're going to struggle. You're going to disappoint. I do that almost every single day as the father of Cooper. But you know what? That doesn't mean I'm going to stop trying. Failure doesn't mean that I'm going to stop loving him. Failure doesn't mean that I'm going to stop caring. Yes, I fail. But it doesn't mean that it changes my trajectory or my mission. And so, may we, as people, seek every day to become like the Father of this amazing parable Jesus has told us, so that people may experience the gospel through us. Let me pray.